Alrighty, it is May 12th. Um, Donald Trump has quote unquote struck a deal with China regarding tariffs, 90-day pause. Super excited about that 'cause it's the same thing that he did with the other countries, all the countries that he placed tariffs on, and then also the same thing that he did with Mexico and Canada for a 30-day pause, that ultimately ended up being re-implemented. Um, there hasn't been any actual conversations about what exactly
Hmm.
this deal looks like, other than the fact that it's uh, I want to say like a mechanism or a committee to talk about tariffs or hold an open line of conversation regarding tariffs. Um, so next 90 days, we'll figure out what exactly is going to be included, because ultimately there wasn't actually any real deal made. But what are your first thoughts on when you heard about the deal that was struck, quote unquote, the deal that was struck yesterday?
Yeah. I mean, I think there was a little bit of a liberal conversation saying like he was lying about the deal. I do think that in some ways that they're wrong. I do think China wants a deal. The argument that China just wants to drag this out forever is if it can get them more power, sure, but I think strategically it's actually we kind of need each other for the economic growth that we need, and also to in some ways, we both kind of the issues of our economy and the issues of their economy, um, almost are the exact opposite of each other, and I think we could kind of learn from each other, a lot from that. Now, any deal that Donald Trump is going to strike is going to be a great deal, obviously, right? The art of the deal will continue and it will not stop. Um, which, that no matter the details of the deal, any deal is going to be struck as it's going to be revolutionary, it's altering the world,
Yeah.
trade, whatever, like, how they describe things as. So I think, that it's worth being prepared for that conversation and then to kind of dig deeper in, what are the actual details of this? What actual will come for it, both in the marketplace and kind of with trade relations between us and China. Um, I do think it's interesting, and you know, I think it's worth noting that, like, as much as we dislike Trump, I would prefer him to go with a deal. Honestly, if you can strike some sort of deal, I would prefer the deal over paying, you know, extra money on everything. Which there's going to be a baseline of tariffs that are just going to stay there. They're gung ho about sticking to tariffs for, um, I guess, the next 4 years to help meet the budget, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
But the prices that the tariff amounts that he had on each other, it was untenable. It couldn't last.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think that, there's been a lot of back and forth between these two countries. It's promising to see that China has been so open-minded to at least having conversations with the Trump administration. It is kind of odd to me that, all of these Republicans are already starting to tout it as a win, saying that, China's already started to bend the knee, which is crazy because all we heard is that there's going to be an open line of communication and a committee to discuss tariffs further.
Mhm.
And not only that, but Donald Trump was the one that started this trade war. So far, we've gotten nothing more than a committee, where he was saying that there was like no way if they started to implement tariffs on us, that there was no way that he would pull down the tariffs. In fact, he escalated it and then said that those things were sticking on until they came out with some kind of deal. There's no real deal right now, which is just insane to me that we, went through all of this for absolutely nothing. But the market is looking at it favorably. Stocks ended up skyrocketing today, which I think is exactly what's going to happen, over the course of the rest of this year. Is we're going to go through some really low lows, and then all of a sudden we're going to have, um, days or a week at a time where stocks really start to climb, just because of the nature of who Donald Trump is and how he approaches things. Because there's just been no real consistency, and so there hasn't been any real reason for stocks to be able to actually continuously grow. Um, Also, the fact that GDP came back negative for the first time since 2022, a couple of weeks ago, which is just I don't understand how Donald Trump didn't immediately say, like, let's put a pause on these tariffs, because the expectation, so Q4 we had growth of 2.4% in GDP. Then expectations for Q1 was growth of zero point 0.4. It ended up being negative zero point 0.3. And so we are on, and not only that, we saw a severe decrease in the ADP job numbers. And so, like, right now there are plenty of cracks within the economy, showing within the economy. I don't know if Donald Trump really is trying to like burn everything down and then build it back up. I think this China deal, like I said, is a temporary. It's a band-aid over a bullet hole, because at the end of the day, there has been no real deal that's been made, and he already has ruptured a lot of uh, goodwill with a lot of our allies, which is also very concerning, because I see a lot of countries starting to look elsewhere outside of the United States in order for purchasing a lot of their goods. So it should be very interesting in terms of like what our trading partners look like for the next couple months, if not years. And not to mention, Donald Trump is also touting wins that we already had wins on, like the UK, right? Like we had the announcement that we had a deal struck with the UK. We had a trade surplus with the UK, so this meant absolutely nothing to the United States. But um, you know, I think that we'll figure out over the next couple months what exactly the rest of the deals look like with other countries, and then what happens in terms of the tariffs with China, which I think is the biggest deal. So it'll be interesting. Did you want to add anything to that before I move on to our next segment?
No, no, I think we kind of covered that.
Okay, so um, I'm sure you heard over the weekend, Joe Biden and the crooked Democrats ended up accepting a plane worth $400 million from Qatar. Uh, Obviously, Republicans are rejoicing because there's bribery going on, um, and all kinds of deals being made through the back door that are screwing over the average American. What are your thoughts on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris doing this disgusting, despicable thing?
Yeah, it is funny how everything's the Democrats' fault. I mean, but kind of to tie in planes here, it's kind of like the all the struggles of, I mean, we had the situation at Newark where the radar goes out for I don't know exactly how long it went out, but situations with that, and that there just seems to be a lot of issues with that. And then the transportation secretary is basically saying that this is going to spread throughout to other airports at the country and things like that. It's like, and most of the arguments are, well, the previous administration should have fixed this. The previous administration should have fixed this. Um, I think uh, the buck does not stop with Donald Trump or any of his administration. It's Joe Biden, it's somebody else. But I do think it's interesting the way in which people respond. His argument is the Democrats wouldn't have accepted this because they're stupid, basically, is what he was saying.
Yeah.
Because who wouldn't accept the free plane? And in some people's mind, and if we're being honest, yeah, who wouldn't accept a free plane? But that's just the thing. It's not the country accepting it. It's not America accepting it. It's Trump, because the way the attorney general argued that it was not, corruption, was that he's going to donate it to his presidential library at the end of his term. Now, what is a presidential library going to do with a luxury plane? We'll see. I mean, probably just sit there and rust. But it is interesting the arguments that they kind of make, where it's just as blatant corruption. There's no other way you can argue it when, I mean, just recently. his son struck a deal in Qatar for some sort of property. I mean, I'm sure that I think they have one in Saudi Arabia and all these other places as well. And like,
Exactly.
there's so many different countries, and who knows what's happening behind the scenes too? Because I mean, in the first term, a lot of people stayed at the Trump Hotel in DC. Like they blatantly went to that hotel and booked a room. Now, we can all act like, well, he didn't have to act on those things. It's true. But the fact that they're basically funneling money to you, or, not just in the aspect of like getting the plane, he's the top 15 donors to my meme coin get a lunch with me or dinner or whatever it is. It's like, in what way isn't that corruption? It is.
Yeah.
If any politician besides him was doing that, it would just be obvious. You would call it what it is, but they argue that he's a businessman or he's just being smart. There's no reason he can't profit off of this. And it's like, I don't know, I feel like that was like kind of how the Constitution was written, that you shouldn't have leaders that are just profiting and using it as like America the business rather than America the country.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you had ethics, you would look at it like that. Um, the arguments they make, though, I'm not so certain that people won't buy them.
They 100% will. That's the
Yeah,
issue.
people are going to say, "Well, he's right. It was a free plane. Why shouldn't he accepted it? He saved us money." They're so focused on saving us money, but at the same time, they're not seeing that, there's probably some lean or tilt to that.
Yeah.
And Qatar is somebody that is known to, use influence and money to buy things. I mean, as a lot of those, and not just that region of the country, or excuse me, that region of the world. I mean, really anywhere. I mean, you have kind of the first iteration of that, with all the billionaires at the inauguration, kind of giving him funds and things like that. It's like there's plenty of other rich people around the world who want something for, their country, their business, whatever it is, some
Yeah.
sort of gain that they can make. And if the president of America can be bought, you're going to start trying to buy.
Yeah. And I want to touch on two things that you said. First thing was in regards to everything that happened with Newark and how there was like an outage with the radars. Um, Earlier this year, the Trump administration fired over 400 FAA employees, some of which actually were over and supported safety, were supported by safety inspectors and airport operations. So the fact that they're trying to say like there were hiccups that they were trying to fix from the Biden administration, even though they just fired over 400 FAA employees, is kind of absurd to me because like they caused a problem, blamed it on the Biden administration, and then say that they're going to try to fix it. And it's just like, well, I mean, why was this not happening under the Biden administration originally? Um, Second point that you touched on, which is that Republicans will buy anything. This isn't part of our conversation today, but I thought it was very funny slash interesting. Um, my family or my girlfriend's family are all Indian, and her father was actually watching the Indian news earlier this morning. He's like really big on focusing on that. He's originally from India. And they started showing Donald Trump taking credit for the deal that they struck or that India struck with um, uh, uh, Pakistan.
Packers.
Sorry, almost blanking right there. And it was very funny because like he started telling me like what the Indian news was saying, and they were saying that Donald Trump was lying about taking credit, and what's crazy was he was literally in the White House talking about how he went and helped broker the deal and said that we were going to be doing lots of trade with both of them. And so that's what really pushed and influence them. And then India media is quite literally saying the exact opposite, saying like there was no outside influence, that they were having a direct conversation with India. What the Indian government was having a direct conversation with the Pakistan government. And I just thought that that was funny because like literally the Indian news was talking
Yes.
about how Donald
But
Trump was lying.
I'm gonna be honest. I think India is lying. Full stop. 100%. Donald Trump. It wasn't Donald Trump. Don't get me wrong. It was Marco Rubio. It was JD Vance. There was continuous conversations with both India and Pakistan. I definitely believe that they did something with that. Now, let's
I
be
do
honest. They
not believe that for a
no.
second.
I 100% believe because India
Why do you
can't.
believe that
India,
he had
India
anything to
can't
do with it?
afford because they stopped. I mean, India was escalating pretty aggressively towards Pakistan. Borderline almost bombing their bases and things like that. And I do think that India is trying to strike itself as, not under China, not under the US, kind of its own almost entity in some ways.
Right.
That's still not true. America is still the dominant power throughout the world. But you can't sit there and argue that you capitulated because the Americans pushed you to. One, I don't think you just capitulated because the Americans pushed you to. I think it's a strategically bad time for India or Pakistan. But you see Pakistan taking the exact opposite approach. I mean, Sharif, the prime minister of Pakistan, was basically saying thank you, Trump, and like kind of saying all these nice things towards him. And Modi was kind of saying the opposite. I don't think, I think Donald Trump kind of saying it was him, that's a bit of a stretch.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
but
I was going to say
I definitely
Pakistan,
think that there was elements of that.
the Pakistani government said nothing in regards to Donald Trump assisting with brokering a deal regarding
Yeah.
the missile.
Uh, the prime minister tweeted out something towards Trump, kind of about the whole situation, and it was much more directly addressed to him, and it catered to Trump's personality, in which I think, in a way that like India's not going to. India's not, and it's more of I think political speech too. It's not to say that one's lying or one's not. One's just going to frame it in different ways. Um, I think one, it wasn't. I don't even think it was really Pakistan who did these attacks in towards the Hindu tourists in the region.
Who do you
So,
think it
I
was?
think, huh?
Who do you think
I
it
think,
was?
no, I mean, it's a terrorist organization, but I think to sit there and say that the Pakistani government is directly responsible for that, I don't believe that. I mean, I don't believe, I think there's probably some corruption between, don't get me wrong, there's always arms flowing between people, but like direct knowledge, like they wanted that to happen. No, I don't think Pakistan operates like that, at least consistently. I think one, this is a very volatile region in general because you don't just have India and Pakistan, with border issues there. You have China in the mix right there too, with border issues. So there's just a lot of international politics playing out in that region, and kind of, I mean, India and Pakistan, this is nothing new necessarily either. It's every so often they end up shooting missiles at each other. Um, but I do think the escalation of it was very concerning. Um, but literally they violated it right after it happened. So I think it's very similar to me to the one that right after he was inaugurated in Gaza, they had this ceasefire, and now 20% of the population in Gaza is being starved. It's not much of a ceasefire in any situation.
I think the India Pakistan what's it called situation is not even close to similar in terms of what's happening with Israel and Gaza, because you got to remember both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers. Um,
Yes,
Palestine does
there's
not have nearly
definitely
as much control.
it's definitely different situations, but the framing of Trump coming in and being the peacemaker is the same. even if it's not happening what's on the ground, right? Obviously it's a different power balances in both situations, but
Mhm.
I think the way in which they're playing it off and trying to say that, he cares about both sides and he's trying to deliberately, separate these things. In Pakistan and India, it's like, yeah, these are two nuclear powers. Y'all need to chill. Y'all just need to stop.
And that's exactly why I don't think that Donald Trump had anything to do with it, because you're right. The prime minister did say that, I mean, the government didn't really push and say that Donald Trump had anything to do
Yeah.
with it, or Marco Rubio, or whoever you said that it was. But the prime minister did. But the issue with everything the prime minister says is like, I don't believe anything the Pakistani government has to say. I mean, you look at Osama bin Laden, he was on their soil for years, very close to one of their military bases. And not once did they have any kind of intelligence that said that, that Osama bin Laden was on their soil. I don't believe anything that the Pakistani government has to say. I think that it is it's a very weird situation that's going on with both India and Pakistan. And I think that because they're fighting over a region right now, and that there
Yeah.
has already been so much history between their groups and their religions, rather than just the independent from the region dispute. I think that kind of muddies the water with everything that's going on. But like I said, I think regardless, Donald Trump went and tried to take credit for that, when in reality, I don't think that he had anything to do with that. I think the prime minister is just trying to keep weapons flows, because I mean, the United States supplies a ton of weapons to Pakistan. So I think that right now, that's exactly what the prime minister was thinking. Was he wanted to make sure that um, he was still in good graces with Donald Trump and the United States government to continue the inflow of weapons to Pakistan.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely it is interesting in the region overall because you almost see kind of historically we were actually closer to Pakistan than India.
Hmm.
I mean, I mean, the military, I mean, right now it's not quite, completely a democracy either. Like, I mean, they have the former leader caged. Now, I don't think he's a saint. I think they both are, have done some very vicious things. But I do think that, Pakistan suffered a lot with just different disasters and things recently and economic situations. But you almost see kind of a sort of a shifting of alliances a little bit where China's leaning towards Pakistan and we're a little bit leaning more toward India now.
Yeah,
Um, but I think balancing that alliance is a little bit better for us overall because I mean the Indian government currently, like I mean you heard rhetoric um, from India and in India and even on Indian news and stuff like that some um, about almost like this is like um, similar to kind of the conversation where it was like the slaughter of Jews that Israel used to kind of justify their and invasion and occupation of Gaza even more. You had some Indian commentators um, talking about like this is their October 7th and kind of about the region and things like that. Um, and you kind of I mean there is a to a degree fascist lean of Modi's party and at large. So you do kind of see a lot of this rhetoric between both of them, really, about kind of dehumanizing the other. Um, but the tone to me was much more aggressive than any recent confrontation between Pakistan and India.
yeah,
And I think another aspect to kind of look at from this is how this peace-filled, stabilized world that we were offered by Trump and all these conversations that having, it's not there because their argument was that Joe Biden's the reason the world's chaotic. Joe Biden's the reason the world's going to be like this. And the truth is, the world's always going to be like this. There's always going to be something coming up eventually. And I think we need to get ourselves out of this concept of the next president's going to be able to stabilize the world. Like we're going to have, because we are in a much more multipolar world, there's going to be just different conflicts within regions throughout the world, I would say. You can see with like Ukraine, you can see in the India, Pakistan, and Gaza, but you can even see possible future instances of tension within Asia between China and its neighbors. Um,
Yeah.
so I am concerned what that holds for the overall stability of regions throughout the world. So I think there's something to look at for that as well.
Yeah. Um, I think we should definitely have a more in-depth conversation about Pakistan, India, maybe later, either tomorrow or sometime next week. 'Cause that's, like I said, I think that that's its own can of worms.
No,
Um,
it definitely. I think we're getting into some interesting conversation about that. So I think maybe even having a little conversation about it would be kind of interesting, maybe a little debate.
I know I was about to say we obviously have two very different viewpoints.
I think I think our balancing of ties with that, but I also know that, I mean, the Indian government literally sent people to kill people on American soil and Canadian soil. So I'm
Yeah,
not going to sit here and just sanitize either one. I think you both have your issues, but you're both allies for strategic reasons, but also because, I mean, I want what's best for both of those regions and both of those countries. And, I think kind of working towards that should always be the goal. It shouldn't be about who you like more. It should be what can we do for the overall region, and kind of stabilize it.
no,
Um,
I agree. I agree. I think that right now, like I said, because there have been issues in terms of like between Muslims and Hindus for years before that there's a lot of that bleeding into what now is more of a territory issue. And so because there has been that history, we're suddenly having
Mhm.
to deal with uh, uh, that kind of bleeding into this conflict right here.
For
Um,
sure.
like I
In
said,
which, yeah,
uh,
it's always the dynamic of it for sure.
yeah, and like I said, we'll because you and I disagree on that, we'll definitely have to have like more of a full length conversation because I think this would be a good one for both of us. But I know that you also wanted to touch on before we run out of time today. I know that you definitely wanted to touch on ICE and everything that has been going on with some of these deportations. So I mean, there's been so much going on. Uh, what do you want to start with? That's the real question because I feel like there's been so many different things that we can actually touch on in terms of like El Salvador and reopening of Alcatraz. Um, where exactly do you want to start with this?
Um, I feel like Alcatraz came in and went. Like that was so like it's stupid. It's just that's exactly what it is. You don't understand anything about Alcatraz, and also like
It's a museum. It is literally a museum
yeah,
now.
that's what I'm saying. And also like, are we gonna do museum tours while we have people cave? Like, are we gonna like what does that look like? That's just the ravings of a lunatic, I think. But as for like I think the thing to focus on is the way in which ICE is kind of morphing into almost, and I don't want to exaggerate it, but it's almost a secret police to me. And I
Mhm.
know that sounds crazy to say, but like if ICE, they're all wearing masks in the video of when they're arresting the mayor of Newark. Why
That's
why are
crazy.
government officials wearing masks?
Yeah.
Like what is this watchmen? Are the police putting masks on? What are we doing? Like what are we
Right.
doing? Because you're supposed to tell me that you are the ones in the right because they were storming the bay or the facility. I saw some Republican congressperson said this was worse than 9/11, and I couldn't contain myself because what do you mean this is worse than 9/11? Worse than 9/11?
Right.
People actually died in 9/11, but
Yeah.
ICE was threatened by some like older Congress people and a mayor. Like the argument that they were trespassing and that they were basically, one, the Congress people have a right to visit those facilities.
Right.
That it is within the law. But beyond that, why are you so concerned about people visiting the facility?
Right.
And even if they're protesting outside, so what? You get to do those things. I think it's a stretching of kind of ICE's power in some ways. And, I remember, a couple years ago we were talking about abolish ICE, right? And then I think it came to a fruition and it was a big conversation topic. And then it kind of died down a little bit. I
Yeah.
don't know, kind of have the attitudes towards immigrants change a little bit in the country and things like that. Um, but I think you're going to have that conversation coming back up because, they're using ICE in a way that I don't think it was ever created to do. But it just kind of shows you, some people would argue that the FBI, the CIA, the things that they've done bad is an example of why the institution should be shut down. To me, that's no different than what I see with ICE in some ways. ICE has not existed forever. It was only, I mean, it only became a thing, I think, after, the Homeland Security Bill was passed
Yeah.
after 9/11. So there was a way in which we um,
Dealt with immigration.
but yes, governed this immigration. I also think that, I mean, beyond that, we wouldn't be having so many issues if people could stay. If we, and not to say that, criminals or people who cross the border without permission and things like that automatically get to stay. But one, there should be a process for due process for that. I don't care that they're not citizens. That's not, the Constitution still applies to them fully.
Yep.
And you can argue it away, but understand everybody in this country is about to become some sort of immigrant if that's the government's idea.
Yeah.
And like people want to act like that's so crazy, but why? I mean, they're already threatening to jail Congress people. Who are you? And like, I know it's always funny because like Donald Trump would talk about I'm standing in the way, so they're coming for me to get to you. But the thing is, if they come for your rights, for habeas corpus, for these institutions that give you rights and ensure that the government actually has to listen to you, you know, they're coming for you. There's nobody standing in their way because clearly Donald Trump doesn't care. So I think it's one of those issues that if you begin to talk about it and actually frame it in the right framework and not sitting there talking about, all the crime and things like that, because we're almost so focused to me on illegal immigrants and things like that, that are we even actually resolving crime? Because the majority of crime is not committed by illegal immigrants.
Right.
It's committed by native born Americans. And if I'm being frank, that's probably where we need to focus on more of the issues at. Figure out the immigration system some way, but actually addressing crime in a way that actually targets what it really is. What it really is.
That is such a big issue is what I think my big issue with how Republicans frame the whole illegal immigration thing is that like they're all criminals and they need to be deported. Okay, couple things, right? Number one, why are we using the IRS to help find some of where these illegal immigrants are? Does that not mean that they are productive, tax-paying non-citizens of the United States, that they are actually helping to benefit our economy? That makes no sense to me why we would want to coordinate with the IRS if those are literally people filing taxes and actually like being productive members to our society. Two, we don't even really have, and I know Republicans are going to, this blows their mind because I've had this conversation before. We don't even have an illegal immigration problem. We have an asylum issue problem. At the end of the day, if you are an immigrant, you can go to the port on the border of Mexico and claim asylum. What will happen is you file your paperwork, they give you a ticket, and then you have a court date. The court dates are pushed back years because it is so congested and they don't have enough judges in order to make decisions on these cases. And so there are millions and millions of people who are here waiting for their asylum cases to be processed. Uh, Laken Riley is the perfect example of that. People talk about how, Laken Riley's killer was here illegally. He was, right? Nobody disagrees with that. So was his brother. His brother was eventually arrested. He claimed asylum after the whole Lake and Riley situation happened, his brother ended up being arrested. He claimed asylum. He was found to have as of right now, a valid claim for asylum, so that they're giving him a court date in order to see if he can become an American citizen. This isn't just some random person. This isn't just some, like illegal immigrant. This was literally the not only the same from the same country as the killer of Lake and Riley, but not only the same neighborhood, literally the same family member. He was given his rights in order to stay here in the United States. Obviously, they talk about Lake and Riley, like how this could have been preventable. With the way our asylum process is set up, he literally would have been here anyways. Baffling to me,
I
right?
mean, I think overall, if you don't address through legislation the issues that we have with the immigration system, and beyond that, you have to have a conversation about, the real value of immigration. I mean, one, almost none of the white Republicans or none of the white people here that are so irritated about certain groups would be here without immigration. None of us would be in some ways. And I think that's the thing, that we can talk about. But it's we're here for a reason. Like, hmm.
Yeah. All right. So that's the end of our show today. We'll be back next week, possibly even tomorrow. Um, this was a good conversation. I appreciate you as always, Chase, and I will see you next time, my friend.
Sounds good.
Bye.